Tomorrow I have a flight, and I sent my instructor a list of things that I kind of want to do throughout the flight, because right now we're working on private pilot stuff and getting me trained to teach private pilot stuff, and then once we get it down, we're going to move on to commercial. But basically, of course, he wants me to be able to explain all the maneuvers and teach them in the sky and be able to demonstrate them and everything, but he also wants me to be able to do a little pre-flight briefing with my student, him, on certain maneuvers in a little bit more depth. First, we're going to start with a normal takeoff. I think what I would start out explaining is just kind of doing a little diagram of the runway at the airport that we're going to be using to train, and at the airport that I do my check ride at. We have 2-3 is a runway, and 0-5. So we have 2-3 and we have 0-5. This stands for 230 degrees, and this is 50 degrees, and that is how the runways are aligned. So when we're looking at our heading indicator, it's going to be 0, 90, 180, 270, and basically when we go to get the weather, that's how we're going to determine which runway we take off from. So when we take off, we always want a headwind. The reason we want a headwind is because it decreases our takeoff roll. If you think about it, since we have wind coming at us, it's going to almost prohibit us from moving forward quicker, if that makes sense. Think about if we had a tailwind, it would be pushing us along with our engine and our propeller pushing us. So since the headwind is kind of counteracting that, we are not using as much of the runway, but we're still building up the airspeed that we need because the wind is moving over our wings and building up that airspeed for us. So we're able to rotate at an earlier spot on the runway than we would with a tailwind. So let's say that the winds are coming from 250. So they say winds are on the weather, they say winds are 250 at 07. That means that the winds are coming from 250 and they're at 7 knots. Now, this is how the direction that our runway is. So when we are on final, coming in to land on runway 23, we are facing a heading of 230. So when we're coming into land, I'm just going to kind of draw a heading indicator down here. This is going to be at 230. That's what it's going to be pointing at. That means that the wind's going to be right here coming from 250. So that means the wind is coming at us in that direction. So since we're landing 230 and the wind's coming at 250, then that means 230 is going to be the runway that we use to take off and land because it's giving us a headwind. Now, this is also important down here because when we come into land or when we're taking off, this is how we can determine how much crosswind we have. So we can see that the winds are coming a little bit from the right, and it's 20 degrees off. So the winds are coming somewhere like this at us. So when we take off, if we have that wind, then we are going to put our ailerons into the wind. So we're going to turn our yoke a little bit to the right, and this is going to help us from the wind pushing us to the left because it's coming from the right. It's going to want to push us to the left. So if we turn our ailerons into it, that's going to help us from getting pushed by that crosswind. Right rudder is really important on takeoff. So when we're adding full power and the airplane's getting up to speed, the left turning tendency is going to become more and more prominent. and the plane's going to want to turn left. So we have to make sure that we use our right rudder, and we are always putting our feet on the floor, our heels on the floor before takeoff. So we put our heels on the floor, and the tops of our feet should be on the bottom of the rudder pedals. The top of our rudder pedals is our brakes, and we don't want to be touching that on takeoff. So we're only going to be touching the bottom to control steering. So we're going to push our right rudder to keep us on the center line. Don't over put in right rudder and go off to the right, but just kind of see what the plane wants to do and then add accordingly. And of course, we'll go through that together. Once we get in the plane and we get the weather, we'll figure it out together. But basically, when you get up to the runway, there's going to be dashed lines and there's going to be solid lines. And this is the entrance to the runway. So when we're taxiing, let's say that this is the taxiway. When we're taxiing and we get up here, we want to make sure that we stop behind these solid bars, well behind them. We're going to get stopped behind there, and we're going to do a run up to test everything and make sure the plane is operating correctly. We're going to get all set up for takeoff before we even think about crossing those lines. If there's no tower at the airport, then it's up to us to decide when we want to take off and cross those lines. So basically what we're going to do is listen on the radio. So as we're sitting there doing run up and doing our pre-takeoff checklist, we should be listening for on the radio, seeing if people are saying Pickens County, if they're in the pattern, just kind of getting an idea of who's around and who's hanging out around the airport. Then before we make our radio call, we're gonna check final. So this right here is final. So we're gonna look out our window, check final, make sure that no one's coming in about to land. Make sure that no planes are on the runway, because planes have to get off the runway, clear these lines, and then say clear of the runway before you can clear these lines and enter the runway. So only one airplane is allowed on the runway at a time. Once we determine, then we're going to take a look around the pattern. If there's no airplanes in the traffic pattern, then we hear no one on the radio. If we have traffic on our avionics in our airplane, or if we have a sentry, and we can look at traffic on our iPad, then take a quick look at that. Make sure there's no traffic. Use all of your resources. Once you know that there's no traffic and you are good to use the runway, then you're going to make your call to the area, to all the pilots in the area, and you're going to say Pickens County, which again, I'll make the radio calls, and whenever you feel comfortable doing the radio calls, I'll give you a script to say and you can say it, but basically you're saying who you're talking to, who you are, and what you want. So you're saying Pickens County, that's who we're talking to, who we are, Piper Warrior 44734, and what we want. We want to take off runway 23, and we want to depart to the west. So what we'd say on the radio is Pickens County, Piper Warrior 44734 is departing runway 23, and we'll be making a departure to the west. Then once you've said that, that also kind of gives other planes, if there is another plane in the pattern, that kind of gives them a little heads up that you are taking off. So if they are downwind and they need to extend, or if they're on final and we just didn't happen to see them, that gives them a chance to come on the radio and be like, hey, we're on final, don't take off. So yeah, once you make that call, we can then go over these lines, and these are called our hold short lines. And once we turn onto the runway, we're going to verify that we're on the correct runway. So we're going to look at these numbers that are printed on the runway, and we're going to say runway 23 is verified. Then we have our center lines. We're going to get lined up on the center line, brake, get stopped, and then we can add full power whenever we're ready, using right rudder to stay in the center line. Then what we're going to be doing after that is checking our airspeed, oil temp, and oil pressure. Because if any of these things are not working, then we need to abort the takeoff. So we're going to check our oil temp and our oil pressure gauges, make sure that they're in the green. We're going to state it out loud. Oil temp and oil pressure are in the green. Then we're going to look at our airspeed. Once it leaves 0 and it starts moving, we're going to say airspeed is coming alive. Then we're going to wait for the airspeed to get to our rotation speed. Once you reach our rotation speed, we're able to pull back on our yoke very lightly and climb out. The plane, once it reaches rotation speed, already wants to lift off. It's generating lift, and if we just want to do it very gently, it'll lift off, and then we can pitch for our VY, which is our best rate of climb, to climb out. Trying to think if there's anything else. These lines, you're gonna see them on like every exit and entrance of the runway. These dash lines mean that you can cross whenever you want. So let's say that we landed 05 and we came all the way to the end of the runway. So we landed 05 and we taxied all the way down here. We're gonna make this left-hand turn, and we don't wanna wait because there's probably other planes in the pattern who are trying to land after us and they can't land until we get off. So we're just gonna go ahead and move right over those lines because we have the dash lines on our side. We're gonna get all the way over these solid lines. So our tail should be completely over the solid lines. And then we're gonna say clear the runway, whatever. But if we're sitting on this side of the hold short lines on the solid side, then we can't cross them until we've stated what we're doing over the radio. We've, checked to make sure, or if we're at a towered airport, they will let us know when we are clear to taxi onto the runway and take off. So we don't want to cross those lines at a towered airport unless they tell us to do so. That's all I'm going to say for a normal takeoff. Don't want to go too much into depth and confuse you because you'll definitely learn more as you go, but that's just the very basics, and yeah.